power. All right, cool. We might as well begin with the pleasantries. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Varsity semifinal round of November NYPDL 2022. Huge congratulations to both teams for making it here. This is, I believe, the largest NYPDL tournament so far this year, so making it to semis is a massive accomplishment. Congrats to both teams. I'm Ryan. I will be one of your three wonderful judges. That means my other two judges are also wonderful. I'm not just complimenting myself, I promise. If they would like to introduce themselves, that would be fantastic.
Sure. I think everyone knows me. Actually, it would be helpful. I'm Avi, if you didn't know already. Yeah, can you help me just tell me what resolution and what side you guys are on? That would be helpful. Thank you.
Yes, we are
debating. Put it in the chat. I see. Hold on.
Oh yeah, it's a long resolution.
Anyway, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. Stuyvesant's going to be on Gov, and the resolution is whether or not we would remove the chip. I'll save the context for the chat.
Yeah, and Friends is on off.
Okay, hello, I'm Evan. I coach debate at Dalton. I cannot survive extended periods of time without oxygen or temperatures above 100 or below 0 degrees Celsius. The first thing in my paradigm is go slow.
And in fact, Evan is turning that into a life advice book called Go Slow, the philosophy of living life in the moment.
Nope, it's advice for how to debate well.
That too.
Very specifically directed at debaters.
That's true. And also at everyone in life, metaphorically. Anyways, okay, you guys are varsity debaters and semis. You know the drill. Time each other. We'll keep time as well. Have a fantastic round, POI preferences, all that cool jazz. You know the shtick. Also, we're doing the technology chip, remove the thing from your brain motion, right?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay, cool. I'll probably have my camera off just because I'm attempting to negotiate with my computer to ensure it doesn't die. But I promise I'm here. Don't worry. Anyways, without further ado, call this house to order and warmly invite the Prime Minister to open the case that stands in their name. Hear, hear.
Okay, lovely. For POIs, just ask them verbally. Thanks everyone for coming or watching or debating or judging. Appreciate it. I think it's going to be a great round. Okay. I'll start my time now. I want to start with a question that I think is underratedly quite important in the context of this round, which is what flavor chip are we talking about? I'll give opposition a chance to respond to that before I talk more about it. Defining this house, we're defining this house as just an average rational actor. What kind of decisions this chip can help you with. We tell you this is basically defined in the motion, but we think because the chip knows what's objectively best for you, we think it involves a sort of broader decisions like job or romantic partner and decisions where you're actively deliberating between choices. So we don't think it's fair to define the chip as like constantly in your head telling you like, oh my gosh, you should go have a snack now, you're hungry. But we do think it's involved in more than just the most major life decisions ever. Okay, for our framework, we have various philosophical considerations, but broadly speaking, we are talking about what's going to create a good society, and we want to consider this both inside the life of the individual and outside of the world of the individual in this life where chips can tell you what to do. So our first contention here is what does the best mean? And first subpoint under this is what is best for you is not necessarily what is best for society. Why is that? A few reasons. First of all, we tell you that the chip inherently tells you what is in your self-interest, and that a self-interest driven society is bad. I think a great analogy for this is the chip is like basically like the literal devil sitting on the side of your shoulder. It's constantly telling you what it thinks is bad for you, notably you and only you, not you and your friends or you and your family or you and the rest of the world. This means that it's basically a self-interest machine. If you could give up your cookie to solve world hunger, would the devil on your shoulder tell you to do it? Maybe not if you really wanted that cookie. This is an extreme example, but I'm sure you see where I'm going with this. The chip is constantly telling you to do things that are good for you, regardless of the morality behind them. What's the importance behind this, and how is SideGov uniquely better? First of all, we tell you the act of removing the chip makes you feel symbolically more empowered to make your own judgments and form your own moral decisions and values, just like literally the action of throwing out the chip, which for so long has been telling you this is in your best interest. We think that people are empowered to make this choice. It's kind of like, I would imagine as kind of like a teenage rebellion sort of thing, but that the act of removing it actually does empower you to make more moral choices. But furthermore, we tell you that on-off, having the chip in your head makes it way harder to make moral choices. Why is that? A few reasons. Firstly, people are naturally inclined towards self-interest because they feel the effects of acting in their self-interest more directly, i.e. in the cookie example, you feel the effects of eating the cookie more than you feel the effects of the suffering of others. Secondly, we tell you in order to act morally and not in your self-interest, you have to effectively abandon something that is built into you, like a physiological, something that your body is telling you to do. That's hard, but could you imagine what makes it harder? Being taunted and told that you're doing wrong, or being constantly reminded when you're making a quote unquote wrong choice, even if that choice is in the best interest of society, that you're choosing wrong. On Gov, we tell you you can abandon what you know is best for you because you can debate yourself and you can consider the merits of acting morally. You can think beyond yourself. We tell you that social movements require sacrifice, and so government achieves a net better society. You as an individual have a moral responsibility to engage in actions which might be detrimental to yourself for the greater good of society. So removing the chip is therefore a principled moral obligation. For the extent that the chip proliferates in society, makes a worse society. The second subpoint under this contention is that best for you is just simply a subjective, announcement. What kind of best does the chip advocate for? This goes back to sub-contention 1, but I'll give you an example to frame this. Let's say Chip knows you're very interested in a specific person romantically. The chip knows that, but you also know that, we as an impartial observer know that the person might not be into you. Does the chip tell you go after it? Like that will make you happy if you go after this person who you are romantically interested in? Or does the chip tell you don't go after them because they might not be into you, and that crushing rejection will make you sadder? We tell you there's often these situations where there's no single right answer, and like how the chip calculates right, and there being quite possibly two possible rights or two possible wrongs mean the chip is not necessarily even better at calculating your own self-interest than you are yourself. Furthermore, we tell you another impact, two more impacts beyond this, is that it's probably problematic that you come to expect perfect outcomes in your own life because you have this thing which we are all calling like a perfect decision maker in your head. And this ultimately makes you sadder. It gives you worse mental health because if you feel like the life you're currently living is quite possibly the best outcome you could have achieved in life, and this life is anything less than your ultimate dreams, you just feel sad about where you've come to. Our second contention here is self-actualization. The first subpoint under this is agency. We tell you that like even if the chip has some sort of knowledge about what's best for you, we tell you that like the fact that we're like elevating this chip above people's own abilities to make their own decisions, firstly magnifies the negative impacts on op because people are trying to listen to the chip, and second of all, like just the impacts on agency. People like agency. Humanity is fundamentally defined by our ability to make choices. That's why we like value our own decisions over like dogs who make decisions more about like food and things like that than we do, because we're capable of higher level agency and thinking and just the sense of morality. Secondly, under this, we tell you that at some point, everybody makes a choice which is objectively not good for them. And we tell you that this actually ultimately is good for them. This is a learning experience. You're learning how to be a better person by making a bad choice and learning from it. We tell you this is how you learn life lessons. You're never if you constantly think you made the right choice, you're never expected to improve because you're like, I made the best choice I could. There was no possible way for me to improve. Even if you did make the best possible choice, you're not thinking critically about your own actions, which is the unique government impact here. And furthermore, we tell you there are some mental health benefits to being if you are constantly reminded about the fact that you chose wrong, if you do choose wrong, because it just makes you feel bad about yourself. And then the third sub-contention here is virtue ethics. We think you ought be concerned with what creates the best people. And so that's why we value virtue ethics. Virtue ethics is preferable because it uniquely values the human experience, and it's actually able to be followed, unlike certain other principles, because it has defined things which it calls morally good, and we can act in favor of those things. Secondly, under this, what are the main virtues that we ought consider? Introspection. Individuals who are introspective have a better understanding of themselves, which makes them better equipped to deal with moral failings like jealousy because they understand it. This also makes life better because people can deal with their mental health issues better. So under this analysis of what's best for you and understanding society, we tell you that you're more intuitively good if you If you know what's good for you, chances are you also know what's good for other people. We want you to learn what's good for you and to be able to make those decisions on yourself, not have the chip make those decisions for you. Insofar as in a democracy or in a society broadly, we are often charged with making these kinds of determinations. You'll be better equipped to be a functioning member of the society, and you'll be a better person. We tell you that opposition is coercive to these virtues because the chip tells you what to think. You never have to discover that for yourself. You don't have to discover what it is you really want. And we tell you, especially in teenage years, it's important to form these capacities. The chip tells you what to do. You never need to, again, figure that out for yourself, which is the impact being you create fundamentally worse people in a worse society. The chip can't tell you everything, and where it doesn't, individuals are fundamentally worse at making those choices. For all these reasons, I strongly encourage a government ballot. Thank you.
Okay.
Wonderful. Thank the Prime Minister. Call upon Leader of
Oh,
Opposition
sorry,
here.
Ryan.
All good, all good. You got it.
Oh, okay. Hi, I'm Jenny. I'm gonna be the Leader of Opposition and also the Member of Opposition. I prefer verbal POIs. And I think that's it. So my time will begin on my first word. Okay, so first, before I get into my own contentions, I'm going to go over some definitions, some topic-based things. I agree with all the definitions, and then I would just like to suggest for what flavor chip, Cool Ranch, easily the best, no debate there. And now I'm going to go just straight into my claims, and then I'll refute my opponents. So our first contention is comparative disadvantage if you remove the chip. So subpoint A, most people will keep in this chip for 4 substantive reasons. 1, people hate making decisions on their own. 2, and the chip creates solvency for this. 2, the chip probably has a better, more objective frame of reference about your own skills and abilities, so it will make well-informed, non-subjective choices for you. 3, even if number 2 is not always true, the appearance of a chip that is so prolific implies that it makes better decisions for you from a more objective point of view. So people will treat it as such, even if it doesn't always happen, which is what Gov is kind of trying to tell you. Then the 4th substantive reason why people will keep the chip in is conformity. People like having what other people have. The grass is always greener on the other side. People want what others have, right? So chances are most people are going to keep this chip in. Second subpoint under this contention is that this chip has tangible benefits for you, 4 warrants for this as well. 1, if it is so prolific in this world and it's become a norm, obviously it has some sort of value as determined by someone. 2, even if it's not objectively good for everyone, since we live in this world, we have to think about how to thrive in this world, so we must view this as good in the world of the debate, regardless of its real implications. 3, this is a device that takes information about you and computes it. That's basically what things like grades are, what other metrics of measuring people's abilities are, just on a personal, more intimate level. And 4, it makes you more sure of your decisions if you have something in your brain telling you should do it and then you agree. So these 2 first subpoints under comparative disadvantage lead into the 3rd subpoint C, which is that if you were the only person or one of the few people who removes this chip, then you are one of the only people who doesn't have a strong sense of what is best for you, and you're at an extreme disadvantage when entering the adult world in regards to relationships or jobs or anything else. Much like in a debate round, in a capitalist economy, everything is comparative. So even if you are a capable candidate or a capable person without the chip, you will be less capable than the people who do have it, which will be the majority as proven by my subpoint A. You will consistently be adjusting to catch up to the speed at which others operate with this chip. This chip is kind of like some sort of helpful tool, right? So this means that you're at an inherent disadvantage to all these people. So regardless of how capable you are, your quality of life will significantly decrease because you have to spend more time on these decisions that people are making in a split second with aid from the chip. And that's going to decrease your self-esteem too, because you're going to be less successful than other people that have the chip. So when we're looking long-term into this individual's life, if you take out this chip, then you're going to feel awful about yourself, and tangibly and literally, you're probably going to have a less successful life comparatively to other people if they have the chip in themselves. Okay, my second contention here is harms to your sense of self, which is kind of like a direct clash with their second contention of self-actualization. So I'm going to do a lot of cross-application in my refutation. But anyway, so my second contention is harms to your sense of self. 3 subpoints under this. 1, taking out the chip will take out a portion of your knowledge about yourself. You won't be able to retain lessons you learned about yourself through trial and error without calculation. There are a lot of things that your brain does that aren't just about memory, but about reacting to and evolving to things based on memory. So what is this going to lead to? It's going to lead to a higher risk of you making mistakes in adult life that you already made in childhood, but you learn to grow from that chip, but you're going to continue making them because you don't have that chip telling you what to do anymore. So the consequences are going to be more severe for these mistakes in adult life if you choose to do it. So that means that the leeway that you get when you're a child, when like the chip is still collecting data and information about you, that means that that information is going to help you in the adult world, when you're adult, when the consequences are more severe. Furthermore, this is going to lead to imposter syndrome. You're going to feel like you don't know yourself completely because literally a piece of you is missing, right? A part of you is missing that you've had for 18 years, for the formative years of your life. So you are going to feel like very like just like disturbed by this, regardless of whether like you really, really want this or whatever like side gov is trying to tell you. This is going to be a really strange adjustment, and it's going to lead to you feeling like you don't know yourself or you're not completely yourself. And that's going to be a huge hindrance on this person's mental health and a huge hindrance on like their growth as a person in their like young adult years. Second subpoint under harms to your sense of self is optimal functioning level. So the big argument from like Gov, or like one of the big arguments from Gov, is that like this chip has too much influence on you, right? Like they talked about how like it's not necessarily good influence, but it has a lot of influence. So I would like to kind of give another example of something that has a lot of influence on your brain that is like an outside presence here, like antidepressants or medication for mental illnesses, right? Sometimes you need certain things to alter what your brain is doing, what your like personal, like your thoughts are to help you function optimally, right? Some brains are inherently at certain disadvantages because of mental illnesses or mental disorders, and to restrict them from like adjusting that to improve like their like functionality in a life where like that disability is not the norm is like very incredibly restrictive to this person. So if this person has any of those things, it's very like it's like akin to doing that. And under the framework of utilitarianism, like how this affects society, right? Establishing this norm of like that you're like you want to take out this thing that like changes your brain, like that's kind of implying that like all other like outside presences that affect your brain are also negative, which is just not true given the example of medication that impacts like mental illnesses. Okay, now I'm going to go into refuting my opponent's case. So their first contention is about like what is the best? What does that mean? And they say that that self-interested driven society is bad. So two responses to this. Firstly, if this is just one person, like an individual actor, this isn't going to like lead to a self-interested driven society, right? So it's not going to have like this huge impact. And secondly, if this is an individual actor, then they're either going to be forced to engage in this self-interest driven society, or they're going to be like they're going to get like crushed in the stampede of people trying to be better than everyone else, and they're going to have a horrible life, right? So either you can succeed in this world, which maybe like has people that are motivated for the wrong reasons, or you can like just like choose to like abstain from it and kind of like live a horrible life. But either way, you don't actually get solvency of like making that society like more altruistic. So because you don't get solvency on either side, you get a better quality of life and a better outcome on side op if you keep the chip in, because you have a better chance of succeeding in this society, even if it's a little bit less moral, because Gov doesn't give you any reasoning as to why one person removing this chip is going to have any kind of like effect on like any other person in this world. Then they talk about how on op's case, it's harder to make moral choices. They say that people inclined towards acting in people will be inclined in acting towards self-interest, and they say that you must abandon something that's built into you if you want to be moral and selfless if you do keep the chip in. And so what my opponents kind of do is they have this like analogy of like the devil on your shoulder, right? But in like the cartoon devil on your shoulder, there's also an angel on your shoulder, right? So let's think about this. What is the angel in the scenario? It's kind of your brain, right? Your consciousness. Your consciousness only lets you see a subset of your entire brain, and that's kind of similar to the chip. Like consciousness doesn't necessarily tell you like what's best for you, but it only tells you like parts of like what you have in your subconscious, right? It's like giving you certain amounts of information, not everything, but that is influencing your decision making, like without like with or without this chip, like in like the world without the chip. So you already kind of have like this kind of built in like assistance in decision making in your own brain. So if the chip is like going to be so like influential and like so like negatively influential as Gov is trying to tell you that it is, then you can take that and you can mitigate that with the effects of your own brain, and how that's going to kind of be like the like angel on your shoulder, so to speak, that will be like arguing with like this chip, right? You're going to have like it's not just going to be like the chip has like tyrannical like rule over your brain and like your decision making skills. There are going to be other like factors in this that are going to like affect it, right? People aren't going to be mindless robots. This chip is merely an aid in helping you, right? It's going to be helping out like in like certain decision making, and so it stands to reason that it would also like the brain would not just like die off and like be like completely useless because you have this chip. It's going to be both. I'll get into more refutations later, but I strongly encourage a vote for the opposition.
Wonderful. Thank the leader of opposition and call upon the member of government. Hear, hear.
I'm muted. Okay. Let's verbal POIs, please. I think that's basically it. I don't have much else to say. We will start our time Now, so let me just get right into it. I'm basically going to go line by line, respond first to op case, then gov case, then maybe talk about some other cool stuff if I have time. So let's talk about what the op says. First, they say Cool Ranch. Sorry, that's the objectively incorrect answer. The actual answer is sea salt and vinegar. But anyway, let's continue with the round. So the first contention is comparative disadvantage. I have a couple responses to this. I think the first thing is that like op doesn't clearly mechanize to you as judges how much of an effect this chip is going to have, because keep in mind, like we as individuals have a capacity to make decisions, and yeah, like sure, sometimes we're going to mess up, but like we also are generally going to make pretty good decisions, I think most of the time, and we will get better at making decisions as our life goes on, because that's how learning works, right? So like it's not like we have literally no decision making capability without this chip. That's the first thing. The second thing, we think just because you like make better or worse decisions as it relates to, let's be real, this is only talking about your career, doesn't mean that you're going to do better or worse in that career. We think that there are a lot of things which like lead to you being better or worse at a job that have actually very little to do with what decisions you personally make. Like we think that some people have innate capacities to be better in certain fields, like Michael Jordan is like inherently really good at basketball, or like somebody who's like a genius is inherently really good at accounting. And so we think that there's like some level of predetermined ability to be good at certain fields. And third, we think that like the amount of work you put into it is going to determine how well you do. Like to a certain extent, everyone knows what the right decision is. It's like to study really hard and to do a lot of work and to like, you know, go out and do a lot of internships or whatever, and just like do a lot of things which will make you a better person. But people don't do that because certain people are more motivated than others. And so we think that like, even if like people kind of know what the right decision is, it comes down to what extent they are actually individually motivated enough to actualize and to make those necessary choices, as opposed to not. And I think that like, interestingly, we think that we provide more motivation under our side of the house, because motivation is tied fundamentally to a sense of identity and a sense of actual self-actualization. Whereas under our op side, it's like sort of purely impacted out to like becoming a flesh monster with the most amount of dopamine in your brain, and not flesh robot with the most amount of dopamine, and not like any sort of higher order human ideal. So we think that you're going to be more motivated. I'll talk about that a little bit more later. But like broadly speaking, like there's that, and then there's the fact that like we're the average member of society, meaning we probably have like some level of wealth, and it also means that we have some level of like connections to people in the same social classes. That's which is again sort of average. We say middle class, right? So you're not going to be like completely dead. And I also think that like not achieving a higher income bracket necessarily matters that much to the happiness of this house. Like at a certain point, it's unclear to me why having more money is going to make you more happy. As long as you can like provide the basic necessities of life, whether or not I can have a better or worse car isn't going to, in the long run, make me more happy than a bunch of the other things which we're going to talk about vis-a-vis virtue ethics, which have gone as yet unresponded to. So, okay, they say if it proliferated this far, it has some level of value. And then also goes on to say that like, it's likely that to a certain extent, people are going to believe this for like social bias reasons and irrational reasons, and not because it has bias. We think that it's going to likely help you somewhat, but like not as much as they tell you it will. And again, wait for op to give you concrete mechanization here, because without that, you're voting gut. So what's the third subpoint? They tell you that you are one of the only people without a strong sense of what's best for you. First off, there is actually nothing in the motion that suggests the proliferation of the chip. I'm going to give you reasons later as to why individuals are going to have a strong aversion to doing this. So like, we think that this is actually incorrect, but also you are going to have a much stronger sense of what's correct for you under our side of the house. Cross apply, the completely unresponded to third contention about virtue ethics and the fact that this cultivates an ability of an individual to be introspective and recognize what is best for them. We think that under op side, you actually have a much worse conception of what's best for you, because you are only used to just doing what the chip says and just believing that the chip is going to be correct. Why does this really matter? Because like, we think that, I don't know if this is a response to a later point, but like, as an individual, we think that we're always going to have some level of irrational distrust of what the chip says, because it's not going to be 100% correct. It's operating based on limited information, only your perception, which is likely to be somewhat flawed, and like only your life experiences. So the chip is able to make mistakes. So we think as an individual, you're always going to be like somewhat distrusting of what the chip says. And if you end up just like doing what the chip tells you anyway, you're not going to be more confident in your decisions. You're going to be less confident because you're allowing a third party, which you fundamentally do not know how it operates, see like people's aversion to like AI and things like that. Like this is an irrational fear that people have, rather than knowing that you made the choice for reasons you personally like sort of believe. This is in the case where people actually do what the chip says, which we think is the only world where op has any unique impacts. Okay, so then the second is sort of harm to sense of self. They say you're going to take out a portion of your knowledge of yourself. I think this is just sort of misunderstanding what the motion is saying. Things that you learn about yourself, you will continue to learn. You will lose the knowledge that the chip specifically told you about like what you should and should not do. It's not going to be like, oh no, I forget like what my name is and like what I actually think. That's not what's going to happen. If you learned a thing as a child, you will continue to know this thing now. Sorry, I got lost on the flow. Okay, sorry. Yeah, so like we think that you're going to learn these things, but more importantly, you're going to know more because again, you're going to develop introspective capabilities, which you simply won't develop under their side of the house. We think that like to the extent that individuals are going to be socially pressured to use the chip, which is probably somewhat correct, or like to the extent that they're going to irrationally want to shove responsibility for their decisions onto the chip, especially as a young person, when you need to have these capacities developed, you need to like learn introspection when you think the most when your mind is the most valuable, i.e. when you are sort of younger, you're not going to develop the capacities to actually introspect and learn about yourself. Again, we give you this warranting already, it has been unresponded to. So you're going to know, empirically know a lot more about yourself under our side of the house than under op side of the house. In terms of imposter syndrome, again, like you won't know yourself actually at all under op world. Turn this and you will learn very quickly even if you don't. Optimal functioning level antidepressants. I think this is just sort of not true. The chip is more akin to like a life advisor telling you what to do than an antidepressant. Like, I don't know. What's another thing that influences the way you think? Drugs, alcohol. That doesn't mean they're like good. This isn't a point which actually helps the opposition. Okay, let's talk about the gov case now. They say if this is one person, it won't have any huge impact. We're talking about one, moral responsibility, and two, like feeling good about yourself as an actor. We're going to make society somewhat more moral and feel somewhat more happy and good about ourselves as an individual. They say you're going to be crushed in stampede of people who aren't self-interested. I just don't think that this is true. As long as you can maintain a basic level of income, the moral righteousness that we will provide you is a lot better than what they could provide you. Okay, and then moral choices. I'm not going to talk about that too much. Basically, like, they concede that this is the devil, and like you are, I think to a certain extent, you are going to irrationally concede to what the chip does because of societal pressure, because you've been told it's correct, because everyone sort of thinks it's correct maybe, and because like supposedly it is making the best decision for you, whatever. We don't think that that helps them. I think the last thing I want to talk about is like, why does this really matter? Because even if like op wins you being a better person, we think that like the virtue ethics and being a better person is going to win us the round. Why? We tell you that there are higher level considerations that individuals has as to what kind of an individual they want to be. Like, judge, ask yourself right now why you don't go out in a blaze of glory and overdose on every drug known to man simultaneously. Why not? This would be the most optimal outcome for you as a person who only cares about hedonistic pleasure and what's best for you. Why don't you do this? Because we think inherently as individuals, as this house, we have other considerations about what kind of individual we want to be. Maybe they're irrational, but they're still considerations we have about like having agency and like having a sort of sense of moral responsibility and a sense of like knowing about yourself, all these sort of virtues which we talk about, which is why people sort of fundamentally stay alive. And we think that insofar as this kind of a thing is destructive to those values because it doesn't allow you to learn about yourself and to learn about the world, it makes you a worse person. People aren't going to like this. This house isn't going to like this. You should vote for the government.
Wonderful. Thank the member of government. We'll now call upon the member of opposition. Also, I imagine that you probably don't want to give 13 straight minutes of speaking time talk. So if you want to pause briefly in between MO and LOR, as long as everyone else is fine with it, I think that would be totally fine.
I would welcome it.
Okay. I guess we'll play it by ear. But if everyone is ready, then just quick overview for the judges. I'm going to go into gov case and then off case. Great. So I will begin my time now. Great. So I just want to do like line by line refutation now, like really in depth of all of gov case. So I want to go back to the first contention about what is like the best, right? They have this question about what is the best. And in response to my point about how, like, this is just one person, they basically say you're going to feel good about yourself as an actor. You're going to like get like some moral boost. And I'd like to question why that is like actually a net positive for this person. Because if you have a holier than thou ego about doing something that is so minimal, that, like gov is construing it as like this chip is like not very important, right? Like not very influential. So if you're just taking this out and you get like this really like you get up on your like moral high high horse because of this one thing, then that's a harm to society and a harm to you, because you have an overinflated ego and an overinflated sense of self, and people are going to get annoyed by you. People aren't going to like you if you're that arrogant about it. Like, an arrogant person who did something that's like a little good is a lot worse than someone who didn't have that kind of impact, but didn't have a huge ego that like made other people feel bad about themselves. Like, I think this idea of like you feeling good about yourself for like something that's so like minimal, that like what like MG kind of does in like his speech, like talking about why like this is like not a very important chip. So if this chip isn't really that minimal, but it's going to give this person like a big like moral boost, then that's not going to be a net good. That's not going to be a net positive. Now to go back onto their case, they talk about how people are, again, like inclined to act towards self-interest. And they say that because the best is subjective, because there's no right or wrong answer, you're also going to be more likely to distrust the chip, because the chip can like make wrong decisions, right? They talk about this in response to my point as well. They talk basically about how the chip is not necessarily always right, and that's going to lead to like a weird like dynamic between the two. So basically, like, yes, like this is true, like the chip will like sometimes make mistakes. However, like if this chip doesn't actually have like that much impact as Gov is like characterizing it, like they're characterizing it basically as just kind of like an addition thing, like a life coach, right? Like that's not someone who has like the final say in something. So if this chip is really just like kind of another voice, like another opinion, then you don't have to listen to it. It's just a suggestion. It's like if you ask like one of your friends for advice on like what you should do, or if you ask someone else, like you're not going to blame that person if they give you the wrong answer. Like, I don't know why you would blame the chip if like it has such like an insignificant like effect on your life as Gov is painting it to be. If it is actually as like important in your life as a life coach is, then it is not going to be like that detrimental if like the chip makes the wrong decision for you. So they're really just like blowing this out of proportion here, because it's not actually going to have these huge effects. Okay, now to go back onto their kind of like impacts here about how like you expect a perfect outcome to all things in your life, and that's going to impact to worse mental health. So this is kind of like a stretch here, because they kind of change the characterization of the chip to something from like that's like an all-knowing entity to something that has like very little influence on you as a person. So if we're going with like this idea of the chip like not being like very influential, not being like just kind of like having like ideas but not always being right, not always like having like the right idea, that means that you're not going to expect like something perfect from this chip. You're not going to have that high expectation, so their impacts don't really come out here. Okay, now to go to their second point about self-actualization. They talk a lot about agency and how important agency is, because individuals inherently care about those things. I'd like to respond to this by saying that free will does not exist, right? Like choices do not exist in a vacuum. And so like they're trying to throw all these like big like words about like morals and like virtues at you, and like judges, do not pick this up, do not buy any of this, because like we can like just like list out all of the kinds of like ethical like morality like ways of schools of thought that we can think of. That's not going to be a productive or useful debate. Okay, like we don't really care about this stuff. Like agency, free will does not exist. We can argue about that. Like choices do not exist in a vacuum. So yes, what the chip is going to be telling you like might like not be sure.
If free will if free will doesn't exist, how are we able to like consider what an individual can or can't do if their choice is predetermined?
If they're okay, here's basically what I'm saying is that you can decide what you want to do. You can like decide, like you can like try to like consider this. However, like in like the society that they're living in, like choices do not exist in a vacuum. What that means is that if you make a choice, it is influenced by a lot of outward like perspectives. It is influenced by a lot of outward conditions, right? Like you are conditioned to act in a certain way. This individual is going to make this decision based on a bunch of things, a bunch of environmental factors in their life. They're going to be influenced and like pushed by all of those things. And we're going to argue that they're not going to actually do anything about this. They're not going to make that decision. They're not going to exercise their agency because they don't have free will. They're not going to exercise their agency. They're not going to take out this chip. They're going to continue their life without making that conscious decision because they don't have the free will to make that decision. So they're going to keep in the chip. Okay, now going back onto their point about how like making a wrong choice is good and you have to like learn life lessons. So again, like my response here is that like that's what your like years are before you turn 18, like to gather information about yourself. Like those are the times when like you can make like wrong decisions, right? Like the motion implies that like the chip is gathering information about you at like from like when you're like 0 to 18, right? So like those are the times when like it can suggest things and you can still make wrong decisions. Like that happens. So like this idea that like you'll never make a wrong decision is not true based on the characterization that the chip will sometimes be wrong. Finally, they talk a lot about like virtue ethics in MG. No, not right now. They talk a lot about virtue ethics in MG. They talk about how like introspection is really important and how like your decision-making skills are going to get fundamentally like worse like with this chip. However, once again, like I'd like to go back to like that like metaphor of like the devil angel, right? So if this is really just like a devil on your shoulder, then you are going to have other thoughts. You're going to have other people influencing you. You're going to have your own brain influencing you besides the chip. You're going to have other inputs. So it's not that like this is like the sole like decision-making factor in this round based on Gov's character authorization. They are blowing this out of proportion. Okay, now to go back to op case. So basically in refutation to my first contention, they basically ask like how much of an effect will like the chip have on a person, and then they argue in response to my point about like success. They said like being good or bad at a job isn't about decision-making skills, and the amount of work you put into something determines like how well you do. They talk a lot about like how this like affects someone. However, if you are like the odd one out, like if you were like divergent from something, that means like inherently you are going to be kind of out of the loop, and you're going to be like rushing to try to catch up to something. It's the same thing with like neurodivergence, right? It's not necessarily like this like disadvantage that impedes like your ability to function, but in a society where like being neurotypical is the norm, it does. So in a society where this chip is the norm, which I proved that it was, and since Gov didn't respond to that, that flows through. In a society where the chip is the norm, you are going to be at a disadvantage simply by not having that norm. So like regardless of the fact that like maybe you'll still be able to make decisions, maybe like you'll still be able to be good at your job, you still are going to be having the norm, which means that you are going to be at an inherent disadvantage because of that. Then they talk a lot about motivation, and they talk about how the average member of society won't be like screwed over by these things, and they talk about how it actually like brings you like more motivation because like motivation is tied to a sense of identity. So a few responses here. First of all, Gov completely ignores my warranting about how like my entire first contention impacts like your self-esteem if you are like not comparatively as good as other people who have this chip. And furthermore, in their point about motivation, like you can have motivation with or without this chip if this is really just like an assisting factor. If this chip is really just like something like to help you out, like a little like aid, then like you can still have motivation to do things, because your motivation here now like what you're fueled by is I have like this assistance, I should be able to do it now because I'm getting like a little boost from this chip, right? So now you're actually going to feel more confident in yourself. You're going to be more likely to succeed because you have more self-confidence because you have this chip. Okay, now I'm gonna go into second contention. They respond by saying that like you'll keep your knowledge. In my point about like removing a part of yourself. So Gov kind of misconstrued my point here. My point here is kind of like, I feel like everyone here has probably like done something really stupid and then looked back and realized like you've done it before and like you should have caught yourself. Like that's what I'm talking about. Like in a debate round, like when you forget to like when you drop someone's point and then you do it again like the next tournament. Like I feel like everyone's done that, where like you just realize that something was really stupid and it's in your memory and you know you should have like caught that, but you just don't. You have a more like high likelihood of catching that when you have this chip in your brain because its sole job is to do that. They talk about developing introspective qualities, and again, I just want to bring up like the devil angel like idea, this imagery, right? Like the introspective qualities come from that, where the chip is not this sole like power governing like entity over your life. It is merely part of it. Now I'm going to go into weighing and voter issues and basically explaining why op has won this debate. So there are a few like clean ballots where you can vote op on here. So I'll go over those first. So the first one here is basically about like your like engagement with society, because all that Gov really gives you here is about how like you're going to like feel better about yourself and like you still like will be able to succeed. However, they don't give like any positive like ramifications for society because once again, it's only one person. However, when you're looking at this, and they like talk about virtue ethics, but like that's like again like not really very important because it's not like tangibly affecting all the other people in society. So let's look at the benefits that you get like in engagement with society for this individual person. One, they're going to be more likely to succeed. You can flow through all of my warranting, which was dropped from my first and my second contention about why people are going to have this chip and why they're going to be more likely to like succeed when you have the chip. So not only are you going to be more successful in this world when you don't take out the chip, but you're also going to be like more easily like engaged in the world. You're going to feel less like an outsider. You're going to have a higher self-esteem. You're going to have a better quality of life, and you're just going to like live like a happier life, right? You're going to have less harms to your sense of self. You won't be questioning your identity as much. And like there's kind of like been like a wash here about like the question of like your identity and like I think like your introspection. Like I think that's kind of like basically a wash. I don't think either of the points are very important in the round, but what you see like tangibly benefiting, like physical benefits, like economic benefits, like social, like emotional benefits here, you get more on-side op if you keep the chip in. Okay, so that's like kind of the clean voter issue that you get on op. And then the final one that you like it's like a slightly smaller one, but it's still very important like in like the overview of the round here about like why you can cleanly here vote for op is because that when you compare like when you're comparing like yourself to other people, that's just going to make you feel really bad. So regardless of like the actual tangible outcomes of any of this, even if you don't buy any of my warranting, which again goes clean unresponded to, even if you don't buy anything I said in my very first speech, you can still flow through that this person is probably going to always inevitably compare themselves to all the people that do have the chip in their lives. They're going to compare themselves, and even if that's an inaccurate comparison, they're still going to feel bad because I'm sure they'll find something to criticize about themselves. Humans are inherently critical, they're inherently comparative. So even if it's not true, I'm sure this person will find something to feel like less confident about themselves, and they'll blame it on their decision to take out that chip. And that's another way that you can cleanly vote off. now let's look at like some voting, some like points of clash and weigh. So the big kind of like point of clash, I think, in this round is the idea of like how much power this chip has on you. So what Gov characterized it is as like kind of like another entity, like life coach, like a devil on your shoulder, whatever. So I'm gonna like go with that characterization of it, kind of like as like an assistant, as an aid, as an influence, but not as like a fully like present, like all-knowing, like governing body on like your personhood, right? So if we're looking at it through that way, we actually win on agency, because having this other perspective allows you to think more carefully, because you get another like opinion on what you should be doing, what decisions you should be making. So you actually get more introspection on-site op when you keep the chip in and you add another voice to like this discussion. Secondly, you also get benefits on-site op only on when you're talking about like if like this person is going to like act in self-interest or not, because we tell you that if this person is like thinking about like themselves like in regards to the entire society, or if they think of themselves as an outsider, like only as an outsider who isn't like, then like they have no motivation to like work to like engage with the rest of society who has the chip. Whereas if they have the chip, they're motivated to engage in with other people who like similarly like share that like that trait. Then the next kind of like thing that we want to weigh on here is like magnitude, right? So like, who is this affecting? This is really just affecting one person. So all of Gov's points about like the greater good, those just don't flow through, because they don't really matter in this round, because the magnitude here, like the warranting out like why this is going to affect the entire society is not true. And like just like on one person, like we can't really measure any of this. So when you look at time frame, because this person's going to be happier in the short term and in the long term, short term because they're going to have like short term like success in society when they have this chip, and long term because they're not going to have like all these crises, and because they're going to be a more developed person, strongly encourage an opt ballot. Thank you.
To be clear, you still have a weighing speech, right? Like it's not my turn yet.
No, that
No,
was fine.
Yeah.
No.
That was a very long for one speech.
Yeah. She just
Yeah,
took-
it
That's
included
both, yeah.
both.
Oh, that included both. Okay, gotcha.
Yes, you got it. So thank the, I was trying to come up with a fun name to combine member and leader of opposition, like Leo member of opposition, like some conjoined version of them, and call upon Prime Minister to conclude the round. Here.
Okay. Just getting out of timer. That was funny. Just member of opposition. Okay. Lovely. Okay. I'll start my time now. Good afternoon/evening, judges. I'm just going to wait for you guys, and I'm going to integrate some responses into my weighing and then try to flag them as best as I can. Okay, so I think there's a low level of happiness that is really where the bulk of this debate has taken place. And I'm going to try to prove to you why I think government has won this low level of happiness, even if it might not seem like the most intuitive response. But I'm also going to talk a lot about higher level of happiness and why I think that actually is important in the terms of self-interest and outside of self-interest. And I think we actually do have more than one value that we're valuing in this debate. So think about that as we're moving forward. So first, in terms of like, I'm going to call this low level self-interest. First of all, we give you all these impacts in my first speech about like why mental health decreases on-site up. Like you feel like you've maxed out on your capacity to make good decisions. You're sad that you feel like like your life has been predetermined for you. You feel like you haven't had agency in these choices. And furthermore, you feel like if this is your best life, like why do you still have problems? Since problems are fundamental to life, you're just going to feel sad and have no way of taking that out again. And just the sadness that someone is constantly telling you what to do and that they don't trust you to make decisions for yourself. So we give you these unique mental health impacts, and we think like, I'm going to try to weigh to prove to you why these are more important than what OP offers. What does OP offer here? OP offers a few concrete impacts in their first speech. One, that you get a worse career. Two, that in some sense you get taken advantage of. Let's break this down. First of all, why is this in general unlikely? We tell you, first of all, in my speech, that self-interest is a fundamental like sense. And we don't think just taking the chip out means you're like completely unaware of what's in your best interest. Like we don't think you're going to be like walking in front of cars and then having them run you over because you don't know what's in your best interest. We think some aspects of safety and like your life experience does kick in here, and you still do know what's in your self-interest. So to a large extent, we think we minimize here. And then furthermore, we think we minimize what is said here when Henry gets up and tells you there are some things that fundamentally make you better at getting low level happiness than other people, which is like, if you're smart, you're going to earn more money than if you're not smart. And the last thing I'll say about this is that just like this idea of getting taken advantage of, we tell you is unlikely for two reasons. First of all, there's nothing in the motion, as Henry tells you, that suggests that this chip is proliferated or that like other people when faced with this decision have chosen to keep it. There's nothing that suggests this in the motion. But furthermore, we tell you if you buy ops framing where like you can just ignore the devil on your shoulder, and I'm going to talk about why this contradiction is super important. If you can just ignore the devil on your shoulder, then presumably other people are occasionally making decisions that are also not in their own self-interest, and thus you're not going to be alone, even if you are alone, in the fact that you're not acting in your own self-interest and you somehow don't have any conceptualization of self-interest. We don't think this is going to be like super high level harms. Yeah, maybe you earn slightly less money, but like, you know, you can spend that money on things you want. Like maybe the chip tells you on your shoulder, you should spend that money on health insurance, but it really makes you happy to spend that money on like a trip to Hawaii. So all's well that ends well. We think this is probably sort of a wash. What is the fundamental contradiction in the op case? They tell you that you can ignore the chip because it's not the devil. That means they have to bite the harms of their own case, while we tell you there's a unique benefit to not having to listen to that voice, which means you basically make better decisions. The last point of happiness that op brings up is like the sense of like questioning identity. We tell you that questioning your identity and coming to some sort of result from that is actually a level, like a higher level of happiness. We tell you that's why like post midlife crisis, people tend to be happier and more satisfied with their life because they've questioned their identity, they've thought about what like life truly means to them, and they've come to a conclusion. So we actually think this ultimately results in more happiness. And then they tell you you're going to regret your choice. We tell you like regret is just universal. If you don't take it out, you're going to regret it. If you do, you're going to regret it. Whatever, it doesn't really matter. Even if you don't buy anything I've just told you, weigh the mental health effects of feeling like the trip has failed you, or that there's a max capacity on your own happiness over like the slightly more money or the slightly less people taking advantage on you on their side. We think that like the fact that mental health affects your happiness so directly, and money, like you can be happy with less money, means that these impacts should weigh in favor of the government. The second clash I see here in this round is making good decisions. And I guess there are two versions of this. One is making the decisions that make you happy, and one is making decisions that make society happy. On making decisions that make you happy, we tell you this is not the most important thing. We tell you that people have a yearning for things beyond low-level happiness. People with money and good jobs are still sad. They can still want more out of their life than money and good jobs. And thus we don't think that opposition has proved that the person is necessarily going to be happy on their side. We tell you that moral action and choice, agency, leads to happiness and higher level of happiness. See what I said earlier in my first case. But furthermore, we tell you what makes society happy here. Jenny's argument here is basically that the sum of a bunch of self-interested people's happiness is either greater than or equal to the sum of some self-interested people's happiness and some not self-interested people's happiness. Why is that not true? Because when you act in favor of greater societal good, you're increasing everyone else's happiness, and oftentimes self-interested happiness comes at the cost of somebody else's happiness, like pursuing someone romantically when they're not interested in you. It comes at the expense of their own happiness, but increases your own. Thus, on side opposition, we think you're not actually more happy. The last point here is making moral decisions. We tell you just on our side, you're more equipped to make moral decisions, and this matters because we create a happier society, but we're the only world where people make moral considerations. For all these reasons, I strongly encourage a government ballot. Thank you.
Wonderful. I thank all speakers for an excellent round of debate. Fantastic job to both sides. A lot of fun to listen and judge. By we, I mean all three of the judges will privately deliberate. We'll submit ballots. Once we have a result, we'll come back and give you RFD and all that cool, fun, exciting stuff. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Great round.
Thanks for a great round.